Hey guys, tonight we are heading back in time to a dusty valley nestled in the ancient kingdom of Judah. Imagine you're standing on a hillside, the morning sun just beginning to warm the dry earth. Below you, two entire armies are arrayed in lines of battle, the air thick with the smell of sweat, leather, and nervous tension. You can hear the low murmur of thousands of men, the clink of spear on shield, and then a single voice, a booming, earth-shaking sound that makes the very stones vibrate. A man, a giant of a man, steps out between the armies, his armor glittering like a bronze god, and he issues a challenge that makes every soldier's blood run cold. Let's be honest, if you were in that battle line, hearing that challenge day after day, smelling the fear of the man next to you, you probably won't survive this, not with your courage intact anyway. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I love seeing where you all are tuning in from. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. The day begins not with the crowing of a rooster, but with a vibration. It's a low, resonant thrumming that seems to rise from the very soil of the valley floor, a sensation felt more in the bones than in the ears. For the men of Israel, huddled on the northern slope of the valley known as Elah, this feeling has become their dreaded alarm clock. It is the herald of their daily humiliation. The sun is still a hesitant blush on the eastern horizon, painting the acacia trees in silhouette and casting long, cool shadows that stretch like grasping fingers across the dew-kissed ground. A gentle breeze, a final gift from the departing night, whispers through the olive groves, carrying with it the scent of dust, wild thyme, and the metallic tang of fear. It is a beautiful morning, one that a shepherd would welcome and a farmer would praise. But here, in this valley caught between two armies, its beauty is a cruel mockery. On the southern ridge, the camp of the Philistines is already stirring. Their fires burn brighter, their voices sound louder, more confident. They are a professional army, a confederation of sea peoples hardened by generations of conflict. And their encampment at Saco is a testament to their organization and might. Their tents are laid out in orderly lines. Their sentries march with a crisp, intimidating rhythm. And the sounds that drift across the valley are of grinding stones sharpening blades, of armorers hammering dents from shields, and of coarse laughter that holds no warmth, only derision. They are the invaders, the occupiers, the point of a spear aimed at the heart of Judah, and they are masters of this kind of warfare, the war of waiting, the slow, methodical crushing of an enemy's spirit. The Israelite camp, by contrast, feels temporary, almost apologetic. It spills across the hillside near Azekah, a sprawling collection of goat hair tents and makeshift shelters. These are not professional soldiers, for the most part. They are farmers, vintners, and herdsmen, called away from their fields and their families by the king's decree. Their armor is often a hodgepodge of leather and bronze, passed down from father to son. Their swords are for skirmishes with Amalekite raiders, not for pitched battles against an Iron Age superpower. Their morning sounds are quieter, more subdued. The murmur of prayers, the nervous coughs, the low bleating of a pack goat, the clatter of a clay pot dropped by trembling hands. For 39 days, they have woken to this same gnawing dread, a cold stone in the pit of their stomachs that the morning's meager portion of flatbread and watered wine cannot dislodge. King Saul, in his larger, slightly more ornate tent at the center of the camp, feels the vibration most keenly. For him, it is the thrumming of his own failure. He is a king chosen for his stature, a head taller than any other man in Israel, a warrior who was meant to be their champion. Yet he sits on his campaign stool, the fine linen of his tunic feeling like sackcloth against his skin, and he listens to the silence of his own generals. He has offered riches beyond imagining, a princess for a bride, a family line exempted from taxes forever, a king's ransom for a hero. But for 39 days, the offer has been met with averted eyes and shuffling feet. Every man in his army, from the most decorated commander to the rawest recruit, has looked at the source of that vibration and found his courage wanting. The God who had once answered Saul with thunder and victory now seems silent. And in that silence, Saul's own anxieties have grown into a suffocating monster, one that haunts the inside of his tent just as surely as the giant haunts the valley outside. And then he comes, as the sun fully clears the ridge, casting the valley in a harsh, revealing light. He emerges from the Philistine lines. He doesn't march, he proceeds. Each step is a deliberate, ground-shaking impact, a statement of power. He is not merely a man. He is a geological event. His name is Goliath, and he is from Gath, one of the last strongholds of the Anakim, the ancient race of giants that had made the ancestors of these very soldiers tremble with fear. He is the physical embodiment of their national nightmares. To the Israelite soldier watching from the ridge, shielding his eyes against the morning glare, Goliath is a figure of impossible scale. He is well over 9 feet tall, a walking siege tower of muscle and bronze. The sun catches the burnished surface of his helmet, a solid bronze cap that seems to absorb the morning light and radiate a terrifying glare. From it, a plume of dyed horsehair, perhaps a blood red or a stark black, bobs with each step, a mocking flag of his own martial prowess. His face, visible beneath the helmet's rim, is a landscape of hard angles and old scars, dominated by a thick, braided beard that is as much a part of his armor as the metal. His eyes, even from this distance, seem like chips of obsidian, cold and utterly devoid of mercy. His armor is a work of terrible artistry. He wears a coat of mail, thousands of overlapping bronze scales sewn onto a thick leather tunic. The soldiers whisper the weight of it among themselves, the number growing with each retelling. 125 pounds, they say. The weight of a full-grown man, worn as easily as a cloak. Each scale is a small, polished mirror, and as he moves, he shimmers, a river of deadly light flowing down the slope. On his legs are greaves of bronze, shaped to his massive shins, protecting him from ankle to knee. not merely functional, they are ornate, perhaps etched with the images of Philistine gods, of Dagon the fish god, or the fierce goddess Ashtoreth. Every piece of his war gear is designed not just for protection, but for psychological devastation. Between his shoulders, the handle of a bronze javelin is visible, slung and ready. But it is the weapon in his hand that freezes the blood. He carries a spear, its shaft as thick as a weaver's beam, a solid piece of wood that a normal man would struggle to even lift. At its tip is a point of forged iron, a massive, leaf-shaped blade that weighs more than 15 pounds on its own. It is a weapon designed to punch through a wooden shield, and the man holding it without slowing. It is a weapon of absolute finality, and he is not alone. Walking before him, almost comical in his comparative smallness, is a shield-bearer. This man is a warrior in his own right, broad and strong, yet he is dwarfed by the man he serves. He carries a massive shield, not a round buckler for parrying, but a full-body tower shield, probably made of wood and covered in layers of tough bull hide. This shield alone would be enough to form a wall against a volley of arrows, but it seems almost redundant. It is a formality, an accessory to the indestructible mountain of a man who follows him. The shield-bearer's job is not truly to protect Goliath. It is to announce him. He is the prologue to the epic of dread that is about to unfold. They stop in the center of the valley, on a piece of flat, open ground where the brook that bisects the landscape has widened the plain. The shield-bearer plants the great shield in the dirt and steps aside, his posture one of bored reverence. Goliath plants the butt of his spear on the ground. The sound of it, a heavy, solid thump, carries all the way up the slope to the Israelite lines. For a moment, there is only silence, broken by the chirping of a cricket, blissfully unaware of the tension gripping the thousands of men watching. Then Goliath fills his lungs. The movement is visible even from afar, his chest expanding under the bronze scales. When he speaks, his voice is not a shout. It is a roar, a physical force that rolls across the valley and crashes against the opposing hillside. It is a voice honed by years of battlefield commands, amplified by pure physical power and steeped in contempt. Why have you come out to draw up your battle lines? He bellows, the words in the common tongue, but shaped by a Philistine accent that makes them sound like stones grinding together. He gestures with a massive, gauntleted hand towards the Israelite army, a gesture of dismissal, as if he is addressing a swarm of gnats. Am I not the Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? The question hangs in the air, a direct assault on their identity. He names their king with a sneer, reducing him to a mere master of slaves. The men of Israel flinch. Their hands tighten on their spear shafts. Their mouths go dry. Choose a man for yourselves, the giant continues, his voice dripping with scornful magnanimity. And let him come down to me. Let him come and face the man of Gath. He pauses, letting the challenge sink in, letting the fear take root. He turns his head slowly, scanning the entire line of the Israelite army as if he is inspecting cattle at a market. He is enjoying this. This is his stage, and he is the master of the performance. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, Goliath proclaims, the offer sounding utterly absurd, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. The offer of single combat is an ancient tradition, but coming from him, it is not a negotiation. It is a declaration of their impending doom. He is not offering a chance at victory. He is describing the manner of their surrender. He then makes it personal, a direct insult to their honor and their God. He takes a step forward, his weight settling, and his voice drops slightly, becoming more menacing, more intimate in its hatred. Today, I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man that we may fight together. The word defy is a poisoned dart. He is not just challenging their military. He is mocking their very existence, their covenant, their faith. He is standing on ground promised to their forefathers and claiming it as his own, daring their unseen God to do something about it. In that moment, he is more than a soldier. He is a walking blasphemy. The final words of the challenge echo and then fade, leaving a silence that is heavier and more terrifying than the noise that preceded it. The entire Israelite army stands frozen, a forest of petrified men. No one moves. No one speaks. No one dares to breathe. Every eye is fixed on the bronze colossus standing in the valley, a monument to their own inadequacy. They look at his spear, and they see their own bodies impaled upon it. They look at his sword, a massive blade at his hip, and they imagine it separating their heads from their necks. They look at him, and they do not see an enemy soldier. They see death itself, given form and a voice. King Saul hears the challenge from his tent, and the Bible says he was dismayed and greatly afraid. This is a gentle way of putting it. Dismay is the feeling of a plan gone wrong. Fear is the sweat on the brow. What Saul and his men feel is something deeper, a soul sickness, a complete and utter spiritual paralysis. It is the chilling realization that they are hopelessly, catastrophically outmatched. Their faith, which was supposed to be their shield, feels as thin as parchment against the iron-tipped reality of Goliath. And so the first day ends as it began. As the sun begins its descent, casting the valley in the warm, forgiving light of evening, Goliath turns. He and his shield-bearer march back to the Philistine camp, their job done for the day. They are met with cheers and the banging of swords on shields, a victorious cacophony that drifts across the valley and serves as a final, tormenting reminder of Israel's cowardice. The men of Israel watch him go, a collective, silent sigh of relief escaping their lips. They have survived another day. But the relief is fleeting, replaced almost immediately by the cold certainty that he will be back tomorrow. The second day is the same. The vibration, the entrance, the armor, the challenge. The words are identical, but somehow they carry more weight, sharpened by the previous day's fear. The silence in the Israelite camp is heavier. The men's eyes are more hollow. They begin to avoid looking at each other, ashamed of the shared terror they see reflected in their comrades' faces. By the 5th day, it has become a ritual, a liturgy of fear. The soldiers know the words of the challenge by heart. They can anticipate every pause, every inflection in the giant's booming voice. The terror is no longer a sharp, sudden shock. It has become a chronic condition, a dull, persistent ache in the soul. Hope begins to curdle into a bitter resignation. They stop talking about victory. They start talking about containment, about survival. The conversations around the campfires, once filled with boasts and stories of home, are now hushed, fearful whispers. They talk about the size of the giant's hands, the thickness of his neck. They debate the exact weight of his armor, as if quantifying the instrument of their doom will somehow make it more manageable. By the 10th day, the army's morale is in tatters. The physical toll of the standoff becomes apparent. Men are not sleeping well, their nights filled with dreams of bronze helmets and weavers' beam spears. Their appetites fail them. The daily routine of maintaining their equipment feels pointless. What good is a sharpened sword against a man whose armor is impenetrable? What use is a shield that will be splintered with a single blow? The discipline begins to fray. Sentries are less alert. Arguments break out over small things, a borrowed water skin, a space too close to the fire. The army is slowly consuming itself from the inside out, rotted by the acid of perpetual fear. King Saul grows more desperate. He walks through the camp, his great height now a mockery of his powerlessness. He tries to encourage his men, but his words ring hollow. They can see the same fear in his eyes that they feel in their own hearts. His promises of wealth and marriage to his daughter Merab become a running joke, whispered when the officers are out of earshot. "Marry the princess and be a rich man," one soldier might say to another with a grim laugh. "A fine dowry for your widow to collect." The king's authority, already weakened by his past disobedience to God, is crumbling. He is a king in name only, a prisoner of the giant in the valley. By the 20th day, the valley itself feels like a tomb. The land has been stripped bare for firewood. The brook, once clear and bubbling, is now muddy and polluted by the waste of 2 armies. The very air seems stale, thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, animal dung, and despair. The daily performance of the giant continues, but now there is a theatrical boredom to it. He sometimes alters his speech, adding new insults, mocking their God more explicitly, calling him a coward who hides behind a nation of trembling sheep. He knows he has already won the psychological war. Now, he is simply savoring it, twisting the knife. The Philistines are emboldened. Their raiding parties become more daring, pushing closer to the Israelite lines, testing their defenses, picking off foragers who stray too far. They know the Israelites are broken, that their fighting spirit is gone. They are simply waiting for the inevitable collapse, the moment when the entire army will throw down its weapons and flee in a panicked rout. It is no longer a question of if, but when. By the 30th day, a strange sense of normalcy has descended. The terror has become mundane. Waking up to the giant's challenge is now simply a part of life in the valley, like the sunrise and the sunset. Men go about their duties with a listless, mechanical efficiency. The camp is quieter than ever. There is nothing left to say. Every argument has been had. Every fear has been voiced. All that remains is the waiting. They are an army in name, but in spirit, they are a collection of hostages, bound by their duty to a king who cannot protect them and a God who will not answer them. Far away from this valley of despair, in the quiet, rolling hills surrounding the small village of Bethlehem, life goes on. Here, the air smells of sheep, of baking bread, of the rich soil. The sounds are of the wind in the barley fields and the gentle call of a shepherd to his flock. This is a world away from the metallic clang of war. Here lives an old man named Jesse, who has 8 sons. His 3 eldest, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, are with Saul in the Valley of Elah. They are tall and handsome, men who look like they belong on a battlefield, men who fit the mold of what a warrior should be. Jesse, like any father, worries for them. He has sent his sons to fight for the king, and for over a month, he has heard nothing but unsettling rumors carried by traveling merchants, rumors of a stalemate, of a Philistine giant that no man can face. His youngest son, David, is not a soldier. He is considered too young, too slight. While his brothers march with the army, David's duty is to the flock. He is a shepherd, but this is not a gentle, passive role. It is a position of immense responsibility and constant vigilance. His days are spent leading the sheep to fresh pasture and clean water. His nights are spent guarding them from predators. He knows the land intimately, every rock, every ravine, every cave that could offer shelter or conceal a threat. His tools are not the sword and spear, but the staff and the sling. With the staff, he guides and disciplines the flock. With the sling, he protects them. He has spent countless hours practicing with his sling, a simple weapon of woven wool or leather. He can hurl a stone the size of a fist with astonishing speed and accuracy, not for sport, but for survival. He can strike a running jackal or scare off a circling vulture. The Bible tells us he has faced down far more dangerous foes. He has known the heart-pounding terror of a lion's roar echoing in the darkness. He has wrestled with a bear to rescue a single lamb from its jaws. He has looked death in the face, not in the ordered lines of a battlefield, but in the chaotic, desperate violence of the wilderness. And in those moments, alone under the vast sky, he has learned to rely not on his own strength, but on the strength of the God of his fathers, the Lord of hosts. His faith is not a theoretical doctrine. It is a practical reality, tested by tooth and claw. He sings psalms to his God while the sheep graze, his voice clear and true in the quiet hills. He is a young man of hidden depths, his hands calloused from his staff and his sling, and his heart filled with a simple, unshakable trust. He knows nothing of the despair that has choked the army in the Valley of Elah. He only knows his Father, his flock, and his God. And now we arrive at the 40th day. In the valley, It is just another morning, another turn of the screw. The sun rises on an army that has forgotten what hope feels like. The vibration starts. The men groan and rise to their feet, their movements slow, their faces slack with resignation. They trudge to their positions on the ridge, their shields heavy, their spirits heavier. They are actors in a play they despise, forced to perform their part as the terrified audience for Goliath's daily soliloquy. The giant emerges, a bronze specter in the morning mist. He seems even larger today, his shadow stretching long and menacing towards them. He plants his spear. He opens his mouth, and the same hateful, mocking words that have haunted their nights for nearly 6 weeks once again fill the air, echoing off the hills of a valley that has become their prison. The air is thick with the promise of another day of shame, another day of fear, another day closer to utter defeat. The spirit of the army of the living God is all but dead. It lies broken in the dust, waiting for a final, crushing blow. The morning of the 40th day began for David, not with the thrum of a distant terror, but with the familiar, comforting scent of baking bread. In the hills of Bethlehem, the air was clean and carried the aroma of damp earth and the sweet fragrance of fig trees. He had been up before the sun, his body attuned to the ancient rhythms of a shepherd's life, moving with a quiet efficiency that belied his youth. He had already led his father's flock from the safety of their stone-walled fold to a patch of pasture where the grass was still green, his staff a familiar weight in his hand, his sling tucked securely in his belt. It was a life of solitude, but not of loneliness. In the vast, silent amphitheater of the hills, under the watchful gaze of the sky, David had found a profound companionship with the God of his ancestors. He had composed songs on his kinnor, a small, 10-stringed lyre, his clear voice carrying melodies that spoke of green pastures, still waters, and a faith that feared no evil, not even in the valley of the shadow of death. His world was one of tangible realities. He knew the weight of a newborn lamb, the sharp sting of a thorn, the rough bark of an olive tree, the chilling howl of a wolf in the distance. He had matched his strength against the brute force of nature, his hands having known the coarse fur of both a lion and a bear, his courage tested and proven in the crucible of sudden, savage violence. But the world of men, of armies and kings and geopolitical struggles, was a distant rumor, a story told by travelers, as remote to him as the great sea to the west. He knew his 3 eldest brothers were with the king, and he prayed for their safety, but the reality of their situation was an abstraction, a vague and unsettling thought, like a cloud on a faraway horizon. That morning, the abstraction was about to become terrifyingly real. His father, Jesse, summoned him from the fields. The old man's face, a testament to a long life lived under the Judean sun, was etched with a deeper than usual worry. His eyes, though still sharp, seemed clouded by the dust of grim reports that had trickled back to Bethlehem. Fathers have a way of knowing when the official silence from a war front is a bad omen. "David, my son," Jesse began, his voice raspy with age and anxiety. He stood by the family's clay oven, from which the final loaves of the morning's baking had just been pulled. The warmth and aroma filled the small courtyard, a stark contrast to the coldness in his tone. Your brothers have been gone a long time, 40 days. A man can count to 40, but a father's heart cannot measure such a silence. He gestured to a collection of sacks and baskets. I want you to go to them. Take this for them. He pointed to a large sack filled with an ephah of roasted grain, a generous amount, enough to feed them for many days. The golden brown grains, toasted to release their nutty flavor, were a staple, a taste of home. And these 10 loaves, he continued, indicating a basket where the bread was cooling, its crust still crackling softly. But this is not just for our family. A captain must care for many men, and a wise man cares for the captain. Jesse then pointed to a smaller basket containing 10 wheels of freshly made cheese, their sharp, salty scent cutting through the sweeter aroma of the bread. Take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit, to the captain of their 1,000. See how your brothers are faring. Find out if they are well, and bring back some token from them, some assurance that they are alive and safe. The request was more than a simple delivery. It was a reconnaissance mission born of a father's love. Jesse needed to see with his own son's eyes, to hear with his own son's ears. The token of assurance was a desperate plea for any sign that his boys had not been consumed by the war. David's heart beat a little faster. To go to the army, to the camp of King Saul himself, it was a daunting and exhilarating prospect. He looked at his father's worried face and felt a surge of purpose. He was not just a shepherd boy now. He was a messenger, a link between the anxious heart of the home front and the grim reality of the battle line. Of course, Father, he said, his voice steady. I will go at once. His first act was one of responsibility. He found another shepherd, a neighbor or a hired hand, and entrusted the flock to his care. Even in his haste, he would not abandon his primary duty. The sheep were his charge, and their well-being was a matter of his honor. Only after ensuring they were safe did he turn to the task at hand. He loaded the supplies onto a donkey, the animal shifting patiently under the weight of the grain, the bread, and the cheese. He filled his own water skin, took a staff for the journey, and with a final word to his father, he set off, the rising sun at his back. The journey from Bethlehem to the Valley of Elah was a descent, both geographically and metaphorically. He started in the familiar, rugged hill country of Judah, the landscape of his childhood psalms. The air was clear, the path was rocky, and the world was painted in the muted tones of limestone, olive green, and dusty brown. He walked with the easy, ground-covering stride of one who spends his days on his feet, the donkey trotting faithfully behind him. As he traveled westward, the hills began to soften and roll, giving way to the fertile lowlands of the Shephelah. This was the borderland, the contested space between the Israelite highlands and the Philistine coastal plain. The fields were wider here, the valleys broader. It was a land that had seen countless skirmishes and battles, its soil soaked in the blood of generations. David could feel a change in the atmosphere. The pastoral peace of Bethlehem receded with every step, replaced by a low, humming tension. Was not alone on the road. The traffic grew heavier as he neared the valley. He saw carts carrying supplies, their wooden wheels groaning in the dust. He saw grim-faced men marching in small groups, new recruits or returning veterans heading to join the army. He saw women with covered faces, their eyes filled with a familiar dread, bringing what little comfort they could to their husbands and sons. He heard snippets of conversation, words and phrases that floated on the hot afternoon air. 40 days now, as tall as a cedar tree. The king's own armor lies unused, defies our God daily. The rumor of the giant was no longer a vague story. It was a living presence that seemed to saturate the very air of this region. David listened, his brow furrowed. He had faced a lion. A lion is a fearsome beast of muscle and fang, its roar a terrifying explosion of sound. But these people spoke of this Philistine as if he were something more, something elemental, a force of nature that had cowed the entire nation. He heard their fear, but he couldn't yet understand it. In his world, fear was the signal to act, to run towards the danger, to protect the flock. The God who had delivered the lamb from the lion's mouth was the same God who reigned over the armies of Israel. The logic was simple and unshakable in his mind. So why were they so afraid? Late in the day, as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, he saw it. The valley opened up before him, a great gash in the landscape. And on the opposing slopes, he saw the two armies, two vast hives of men, their campfires beginning to twinkle in the fading light like fallen constellations. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. He had never seen so many people in one place. The low murmur of thousands of voices, the clang of metal, the smell of wood smoke and cooking food and nervous sweat all rolled up the hillside to meet him. It was a city of men, a city built for the sole purpose of war. He made his way down towards the Israelite encampment. The sentries, seeing a young boy with a donkey laden with provisions, let him pass with a weary nod. He had entered the realm of fear. The faces of the soldiers he passed were gaunt and shadowed. Their movements were sluggish, their eyes downcast. There was no energy here, no righteous fire of men defending their homeland. There was only a heavy, suffocating blanket of resignation. It was a camp sick with despair, and the disease was palpable. He found the officer in charge of the baggage train, a harried, grizzled man whose job was to manage the mountain of supplies that kept the army alive. "I have brought food for my brothers, the sons of Jesse, and a gift for their captain," David explained, his voice clear and out of place in the weary atmosphere. The quartermaster grunted. "Jesse of Bethlehem. I know the boys. Tall lads. They're up on the line. Leave your donkey and your goods here. They'll be safe enough. No one has the stomach to steal anymore." David did as he was told, securing the donkey and covering the provisions. But he didn't wait. The urgency of his father's request propelled him forward. He didn't walk, he ran. He ran towards the battle line, towards the ridge that overlooked the valley floor. He needed to see his brothers, to give them the news from home, and to see for himself what manner of threat could cast such a long shadow over the entire nation. He found them standing in their unit, a long line of men leaning on their spears, their shields resting on the ground before them. The sun had set, and the evening chill was beginning to set in. He saw Eliab first, his eldest brother, tall and broad-shouldered, looking every inch the warrior. But his face was grim, his jaw set in a hard line. Abinadab and Shammah stood nearby, their expressions equally bleak. Eliab, Abinadab, Shammah, David called out, his voice full of the simple joy of reunion. He ran the last few yards and embraced them. Father sends his greetings. He has sent food for you and for your captain. He wants to know that you are well. Eliab's embrace was stiff. He pulled away and looked his youngest brother up and down, his gaze a mixture of surprise and irritation. David, what are you doing here? Who is watching the sheep? The question was sharp, an immediate assertion of his authority as the eldest. They are safe, David answered quickly, his enthusiasm undimmed. Father sent me. He was worried. He told me to bring back word of you. He looked around at the silent ranks of soldiers, at the dying light in the valley below. So, this is it. This is the army of Israel. What is happening? The men on the road spoke of a Philistine champion. He was still speaking, his voice filled with a boy's naive curiosity when it began. The vibration, the same low thrumming that had signaled the start of the last 40 days. But this was the evening challenge, a final taunt before the dark. Across the valley, torches were lit in the Philistine camp, their lights dancing like malevolent spirits. And from the darkness, the great voice boomed, a sound that seemed to make the very stars tremble. It was Goliath, performing his evening ritual. David had never heard a voice so loud, so filled with pure, weaponized hatred. The words were the same ones he had rehearsed for 40 nights, a torrent of blasphemy and scorn. He mocked their king, their army, and their God, calling on any man to face him in a battle he knew no one would accept. David watched, spellbound. He saw the giant, a massive silhouette against the distant torchlight, a figure of myth and nightmare. But more than that, he saw the reaction of the men around him. He saw his own brothers, the brave sons of Jesse, flinch as if struck. He saw veteran soldiers, men with scarred faces and calloused hands, take an involuntary step backward. He saw the entire army of Israel shrink away from the voice, their posture one of collective, cringing shame. They broke ranks, not in a panicked rout, but in a weary, defeated shuffle, their duty done for the day. They had shown up. They had listened to their daily dose of humiliation, and now they were retreating to their tents to wait for the next one. A fire ignited in David's chest. It was not fear. It was a white-hot, holy rage. The sight of this one man, this pagan, this uncircumcised Philistine, holding the entire army of the living God hostage, was an offense beyond anything he could comprehend. The insults against Saul were politics. The insults against the army were matters of war. But the insults against God were an abomination. It was a personal affront to the Lord who had shepherded him, protected him, and given him songs in the night. The fear of the soldiers was not just cowardice. It was a catastrophic failure of faith. He turned to the men who were retreating alongside him, his face flushed, his eyes blazing. His voice, though not loud like the giants, cut through the murmurs of despair with its sheer intensity. "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine?" he demanded, his voice ringing with disbelief. "What is the reward for the one who finally removes this disgrace from Israel?" He wasn't just asking about the reward. He was asking why the disgrace was being tolerated in the first place. He gestured towards the valley, where the giant's laughter could now be heard echoing in the dark. Who is he? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should be allowed to defy the armies of the living God? The phrase "living God" was key. For the soldiers, God had become a distant concept, a silent spectator. For David, God was a living, present reality, more real and infinitely more powerful than the mountain of flesh and bronze who was mocking his name. Some of the soldiers stopped and looked at him, startled by his passion. An older man, his face tired, answered him. "The king has promised great wealth to the man who kills him," he said, his voice flat, reciting the facts without any hope. "And he will give him his daughter in marriage, and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." The reward was staggering, but David barely seemed to hear it. He shook his head, still trying to process the core issue. So a man could save Israel, gain riches, and marry a princess. "And no one has come forward?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine astonishment. He turned to another group of soldiers, asking the same question again, as if hoping for a different, more logical answer. "Tell me again, what is the reward? Why does he still stand down there?" His questions were a stone thrown into the stagnant pond of the camp's despair, and the ripples began to spread. His eldest brother, Eliab, heard him. He had been watching his younger brother's outburst with a growing sense of fury. To Eliab, who had stood on this line for 40 days, enduring the crushing weight of his own fear and shame, David's bold talk was not bravery. It was an indictment. It was the naive, arrogant judgment of a child who had no idea what he was talking about. Every word David spoke was a fresh reminder of Eliab's own powerlessness. His fear curdled into a hot, resentful anger, and he strode over to his brother. "Why have you come down here?" Eliab snapped, his voice low and vicious. He grabbed David's arm. "And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness?" The question was a calculated insult, designed to belittle David, to put him back in his place as the insignificant youngest brother, the tender of a pathetic little flock. Eliab's face was dark with anger. "I know your heart, David," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You are not here to help. You are not here because Father sent you. You came down only to watch the battle, to gawk at the soldiers, and enjoy the spectacle of war from a safe distance. You arrogant boy. The accusation was deeply unfair, a projection of Eliab's own shame onto his brother. He couldn't face his own fear, so he attacked the character of the one person who seemed to have none. He was trying to cut David down to his own size, to drag him into the same pit of despair. David was stunned by the venom in his brother's voice. He pulled his arm away, his face a mixture of hurt and confusion. He looked at Eliab, at the raw anger in his eyes, and saw past it to the fear that was fueling it. But he did not rise to the bait. He would not be drawn into a petty squabble while the name of his God was being trampled in the valley. His response was simple, almost plaintive. "Now what have I done?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Can't I even speak?" Was it not just a question? He didn't wait for Eliab's reply. He saw that there was no reasoning with him, no explaining the holy fire that was burning in his soul. With a final, sorrowful look at his brother, he simply turned away. He walked over to another soldier and asked the very same question he had asked before, his voice just as firm, his resolve unshaken. "Tell me, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine?" Eliab was left standing there, fuming and impotent, his verbal arrows having bounced harmlessly off the shield of his brother's divine purpose. But the incident had been witnessed, and David's persistent, fearless questioning, so utterly alien in this environment of dread, had started a chain reaction. Soldiers began to murmur among themselves. Who was this boy? The son of Jesse from Bethlehem. He wasn't a soldier, just a shepherd, but he spoke with the fire of an old prophet. He didn't seem to see the giant. He only saw the insult to God. His questions were not of fear, but of righteous indignation. The story of the strange shepherd boy who wanted to know the price on the giant's head began to move through the camp. It was passed from tent to tent, a whispered curiosity. It moved faster than any official report, carried on the wings of sheer novelty. A spark had been lit in the suffocating darkness. The rumor traveled up the ranks, from soldier to corporal, from corporal to captain. It was a story so unusual that commanders felt it was worth reporting. Finally, it reached the ears of the men who attended the king. And they, desperate for any news, any change in the dreadful monotony of their siege, brought the report to the royal tent. "Your Majesty," an officer said, bowing low before King Saul. "There is a development, a boy. He is in the camp, asking about the Philistine. He does not seem to be afraid. He speaks of removing the disgrace from Israel." Saul, sitting in the gloom of his tent, surrounded by the trappings of a power that now felt like a costume, looked up. For 40 days he had heard nothing but reports of fear and failure. This was the first thing, the only thing that was different. A boy. A shepherd boy who wasn't afraid. It was a sliver of impossibility, a flicker of light in the profound darkness of his despair. It was not yet hope, but it was enough to make him curious. It was enough for him to say the words, that would set in motion the turning of history's great wheel. "Find him," the king commanded. "Bring him to me." Word of the king. Even a beleaguered and desperate king travels through a military camp with the speed of a signal fire. The 2 soldiers from Saul's personal guard, who were dispatched to find the boy from Bethlehem, did not have to search for long. David had become a minor celebrity, a curiosity that drew men to him like moths to a flame. He was standing near a smoldering campfire, surrounded by a circle of soldiers, his shepherd's staff held loosely in one hand. He was not preaching or boasting. He was simply answering their questions, his voice calm and reasonable. But the content of his words was so radically different from the pervasive gloom that it had a mesmerizing effect. He spoke of God not as a distant memory, but as a present help. And in the context of that camp, it sounded like a foreign language. The guards, in their finer armor and plumed helmets, pushed their way through the crowd. Their presence immediately silenced the chatter. They were the king's hand, and their arrival could mean anything from a commendation to an execution. They stopped before David, their expressions unreadable, a mixture of official duty and personal intrigue. They looked him over, a youth, ruddy-cheeked, with the clear, steady eyes of someone who spends his days looking at distant horizons. He was of average height for his age, wiry and strong from his work. But standing before these 2 hardened soldiers, he looked fragile, utterly out of place. "David, son of Jesse?" the senior guard asked, his voice a formal baritone. "I am," David replied, his gaze unwavering. He showed no fear, no surprise. It was as if he had been waiting for this summons, as if it were a natural, inevitable step on a path he was already walking. "King Saul wishes to see you. You are to come with us at once." A murmur went through the crowd of soldiers. The king himself. The story had just escalated from a camp curiosity to a matter of state. As David followed the guards, the ranks of men parted before them, creating a pathway. Faces stared at him, a sea of expressions: disbelief, pity, a flicker of scorn, and here and there, a tiny, almost imperceptible spark of hope. They were watching a lamb being led, not to the slaughter, but to the den of a despairing lion. His brother Eliab watched from a distance, his face a storm cloud of conflicting emotions, shame, jealousy, and perhaps a terrifying sliver of fear for his brother's life. David walked on, seemingly oblivious to the stairs, his steps light and purposeful. He was leaving the world of the common soldier and entering the epicenter of Israel's paralysis, the tent of the king. Saul's tent was the largest in the camp, a dark pavilion of heavy dyed goat hair cloth, distinguished by the royal standard of Israel planted in the earth outside its entrance. Inside, the air was thick and still, heavy with the scent of lamp oil, old leather, and the unventilated anxiety of the man who occupied it. The ground was covered with fine rugs from the east, now scuffed with the dust of the valley. A heavy wooden table stood in the center, strewn with maps of the surrounding region, but they looked untouched, relics from a time when strategy and movement were still considered possibilities. Light from a single, ornate oil lamp cast long, dancing shadows, making the space feel more like a tomb than a command center. And on a carved wooden campaign chair, a throne of war, sat Saul. He was, as the stories always said, a magnificent specimen of a man. A full head taller than his guards, with the broad shoulders and powerful limbs of a born warrior. He was in the prime of his life, his dark hair and beard showing only the first hints of gray. But the power of his physique was utterly betrayed by his posture and his eyes. He was slumped in the chair, his great frame seeming to collapse in on itself. His gaze was fixed on the floor, and when he looked up as David entered, his eyes were hollow, haunted by the ghosts of his own disobedience, by the silence of the God who had anointed him, and by the tormenting spirit that now plagued his waking hours. He was a king in chains, a giant shackled by his own fear. He looked at David, who stood straight and still between the two guards. The king's gaze traveled over the simple tunic, the shepherd's bag slung over his shoulder, the rustic staff in his hand. He saw a boy, a child, a reminder of the pastoral simplicity he himself had come from so long ago, before the crown and its impossible weight had been placed upon his head. A flicker of something, annoyance, pity, crossed his face. "Leave us," Saul commanded, his voice a low rumble. The guards bowed and retreated from the tent, leaving the king and the shepherd boy alone in the flickering gloom. Saul leaned forward, his massive hands resting on his knees. "They tell me there is a boy from Bethlehem making noise in my camp," he began, his tone weary, skeptical. "They say he speaks with a loud voice about matters he does not understand. Are you this boy?" David did not flinch before the royal presence. He looked the king in the eye, his own gaze clear and respectful, but utterly devoid of intimidation. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice calm and firm, "let no man's heart fail because of this Philistine." The statement was so breathtakingly audacious that it seemed to suck the very air from the tent. For 40 days, Saul had been surrounded by the failing hearts of his bravest commanders and wisest advisors. His own heart was a leaden weight in his chest. And now this boy, this shepherd, stood before him and commanded the hearts of the nation to be healed, as if it were a simple matter of will. David took a step forward, his earnestness palpable. "Your servant will go and fight him." If the first statement had been audacious, this one was pure insanity. Saul stared at David for a long moment, a silence stretching between them. Then the king let out a short, harsh sound that was something between a sigh and a laugh. It was the sound of a man for whom hope was a cruel joke. "Child," Saul said, shaking his head slowly, a grim, paternalistic smile on his lips. "You do not know what you are saying. You cannot go out against this Philistine. You cannot fight him." He leaned back, the leader in him momentarily surfacing to explain the obvious, to educate this foolish boy on the realities of the world. "Look at yourself. You are a youth. Your beard has not yet grown full. Your hands are calloused by a shepherd's staff, not the hilt of a sword. And he, Saul's voice dropped, the image of the giant flooding his mind. He is a man of war from his youth. From the time you were learning to walk, he was learning to kill. His bones are like bronze, his muscles are cables of iron. He has fought in 100 battles, has killed more men than you have ever seen in one place. He knows every trick of the shield, every nuance of the spear. To send you out against him would not be a battle, it would be a sacrifice. It would be murder. Saul's argument was flawless. It was the voice of logic, of experience, of military science. It was the same argument that every single man in the Israelite army had made to himself for 40 days. It was an open and shut case. There was no rebuttal. But David did not argue with the king's logic. He did not dispute the giant's size or skill. He simply changed the terms of the debate. He offered a different kind of evidence, a different resume for a different kind of war. "Your Majesty is right," David said, his tone still respectful. "I am not a soldier. I am a shepherd. Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep." He began his story simply, grounding it in his humble, everyday reality. Saul listened, his expression unchanged, likely wondering what this pastoral tale had to do with the crisis at hand. And when a lion came, David continued, his voice taking on a new intensity, his eyes fixed on Saul, or a bear, and took a lamb from the flock. I did not run. I did not sound an alarm for others to help. He paused, letting the king absorb the image. A boy, alone in the wilderness, with a predator and its prey. "I went after it," he said, the words simple but laden with action. "I pursued the beast. When the lion took the lamb in its mouth, I ran it down. And when it rose up against me, I did not cower behind a shield. I seized it by its beard." He made a grasping motion with his hand, "and I struck it, and I killed it." In the telling, the story came alive in the tent. The shadows on the wall seemed to form the shape of a great, tawny cat, its fangs dripping. One could almost hear the desperate bleating of the lamb, the savage roar of the predator, and the sharp, percussive impact of the killing blow. This was not the boasting of a braggart. It was the testimony of a survivor, delivered with a calm, factual precision. "Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear," David stated, not as a point of pride, but as an established credential. And then he made the connection, the leap of faith that no one else in Israel had been able to make. He looked Saul directly in the eye, and his voice rang with a sudden, prophetic authority. "And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God." He had done it again. He had reframed the entire conflict. Goliath was not a champion warrior to be met by another champion warrior. He was a predator, a wild beast that had strayed from the wilderness and was now threatening the flock of the Lord. And David, the Lord's shepherd, would deal with him just as he had dealt with the others. The giant's armor, his spear, his military pedigree, they were all irrelevant. He was just a bigger, louder, uglier version of the lion. He was a blaspheming beast, and he needed to be put down. David took another step forward, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal, more pastoral, as if he were comforting the king himself. "The Lord," he said, nomming his true commander, "who rescued me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." He had laid his case bare. His confidence was not in himself, not in his strength or his sling. His confidence was in God's track record. God had saved him before, and God would save him again. The logic was absolute, the faith unshakable. It was the single most courageous and faithful statement that had been uttered in that valley in 40 days. All was silent. He stared at the boy, at the fire in his eyes, at the absolute certainty in his posture. Something in the king's weary soul stirred. For weeks, he had been drowning in the sea of human reason, of pragmatic fear. David had just thrown him a lifeline, a thin, improbable rope of pure, unadulterated faith. It was a faith Saul himself had once known in the days before his coronation, in the early victories when the Spirit of God had rushed upon him. He had forgotten what it felt like. This boy, this shepherd, was a living reminder. Was it madness? Almost certainly. Was it a suicide mission? By every military standard, yes. But the military standard had produced nothing but 40 days of shame. The reasonable path had led to this dead end. Perhaps, just perhaps, the unreasonable path was the only one left. Saul was a desperate man, and desperate men are sometimes willing to gamble on miracles. He let out a long, slow breath, the air leaving his great chest as if he were deflating. The tension in his shoulders seemed to ease, replaced by a profound weariness, and a flicker of something that might have been hope, or perhaps just the willingness to let fate take its course. "Go," Saul said, his voice barely a whisper. And then, as if remembering his own role in this divine drama, he added a blessing that was also a prayer. "And the Lord be with you." With the decision made, the king's practical mind took over again. He had sanctioned the mission. Now he had to equip the champion. The boy had faith, yes, but faith was an invisible shield. Saul dealt in the tangible world of bronze and iron. "Abner," he called out. The tent flap opened, and his cousin and chief general, Abner, entered, his face a mask of professional curiosity. "Bring my armor," Saul commanded. "The boy will wear my armor." Abner's eyes widened slightly, but he did not question the order. He and another attendant moved to a large wooden chest in the corner of the tent and began to remove the king's personal battle dress. It was a magnificent set of armor, far superior to anything the common soldier wore. It was the armor of a king, a symbol of the nation's strength. First came the helmet, a heavy bronze cap, polished to a mirror shine, and likely topped with a crest of scarlet horsehair. Then came the coat of mail, a finely crafted corselet of overlapping scales, heavier and more flexible than Goliath. It was the best protection the age could offer. Finally, they brought the king's own sword, its hilt inlaid with ivory, its blade of the finest forged iron, sharp enough to shave a man's beard. Saul stood, and with a sense of paternal duty, he began to dress David for a battle he still probably believed the boy could not survive. It was a strange, almost surreal scene. The tallest man in Israel, the failed king, attempting to fit his own massive armor onto the slight frame of a shepherd boy who burned with a faith the king had lost. The process was an immediate and almost comical failure. They placed the great bronze helmet on David's head, and it promptly fell down over his eyes, plunging him into darkness. He pushed it back, and it wobbled precariously, like a pot on a fence post. The attendants then lifted the heavy coat of mail. The sheer weight of it, well over 50 pounds, made David stagger. It hung on him like a metal tent, the shoulder pieces slipping off his narrow shoulders, the hem clanking against his shins. They cinched the sword belt around his waist. But even at its tightest setting, it was comically loose, the heavy sword pulling the whole apparatus down to his hips. David was no longer a shepherd filled with holy fire. He was a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. He was imprisoned in the king's solution. "Try to walk," Saul urged, a hint of doubt already creeping back into his voice. David took a step. The heavy mail shifted, throwing him off balance. He took another, the metal scales scraping and clanking with a deafening noise. He felt clumsy, trapped, weighed down. The armor that was meant to protect him had instead robbed him of his greatest assets: his agility, his speed, his freedom of movement. More than that, it felt wrong. It was a lie. It was an attempt to fight Goliath on Goliath's terms, a contest of armor and steel. But David's fight was not with flesh and blood, but with the blasphemous pride that the giant represented. To wear this armor would be to trust in the strength of Saul, not the strength of the Lord. He stopped, standing awkwardly in the middle of the tent. He looked at Saul, his face serious. "I cannot go in these," he said, his voice muffled by the ill-fitting helmet. He shook his head. "I am not used to them." The statement was simple, practical, yet deeply profound. "I am not used to them." He was rejecting the conventional wisdom, the royal road, the human way of war. He was choosing to be himself, a shepherd. He would fight with the tools he knew, the skills he had mastered, and the faith he had tested in the wilderness. He would not pretend to be a soldier. He would not cosplay as a king. Methodically, he began to take the armor off. He lifted the heavy helmet from his head and handed it to an attendant. He shrugged his shoulders, and with some help, he worked his way out of the suffocating coat of mail, which landed on the floor with a heavy, final-sounding clang. He unbuckled the sword belt and let it fall. He stood before the king once more as he had first appeared, a boy in a simple tunic. He picked up his own equipment from the floor where he had left it. He settled the familiar leather shepherd's bag over his shoulder. He took his staff, its wood worn smooth and familiar to his palm. And from his belt, he took his sling, a simple, braided weapon of wool and leather. He stood there, unburdened and ready, holding the humble tools of his trade. He had refused the king's power, the king's protection, the king's identity. In that moment, he was more free and more powerful than anyone else in the valley. He had made his choice. He would face the monster not as a poor imitation of a king, but as the true and chosen shepherd of God. With a respectful nod to Saul, he turned and walked out of the tent, leaving the king and his general standing in silence. The magnificent, useless royal armor lying in a heap on the ground between them. As David stepped out from the cool shadow of the king's tent, the full, unfiltered glare of the Judean sun struck him. He was returning to the world, leaving behind the suffocating gloom of Saul's despair and the cloying weight of his useless armor. The soldiers who had gathered, expecting to see a champion emerge, a miniature Saul clad in royal bronze, saw instead the same shepherd boy who had entered. He carried no sword, wore no helmet, and was protected by nothing more than a simple linen tunic. In his hand was his staff, and at his side, his humble leather bag. The murmur that rippled through the onlookers was one of stunned, almost pitying disbelief. Had the king refused him? Or was the boy truly mad enough to go as he was? David paid them no mind. His gaze was fixed forward, on the downward slope of the hill that led to the valley floor, the great stage where his battle would be fought. He began to walk, and a path cleared for him, the soldiers parting as if he were a leper or a ghost. They looked at his back, at the slight frame, the determined stride, and they saw a walking contradiction. He was the embodiment of foolishness, yet he moved with a serenity that was more unsettling than any battle cry. He passed his brothers. He could feel the heat of Eliab's stare, a complex burning of shame, anger, and a sudden, terrifying spike of brotherly fear. But David did not turn. His business was not with the army behind him, but with the blasphemy that stood waiting in the valley before him. The descent was steep. The path was little more than a goat track, littered with loose scree and sharp stones that threatened to turn an ankle. The side of the hill was abuzz with the sound of crickets and the dry rustle of unseen lizards darting through the scrubby bushes. The air grew warmer as he descended from the breezy ridge, the heat radiating up from the parched soil of the valley floor. With every step downward, the sounds of the Israelite camp faded behind him, the nervous coughs, the clink of armor, the whispered prayers. They were replaced by a profound and intimidating silence, a quiet that seemed to be the personal property of the giant. He was walking into a bowl of silence, a space defined by the two armies that watched from the slopes like colossal, silent judges. He could feel thousands of pairs of eyes on him. From the northern ridge, his countrymen watched with a kind of horrified fascination. From the southern ridge, the Philistines watched with open mockery, their laughter and jeers just beginning to drift across the expanse. To them, this was the punchline to a 40-day joke. Israel, the nation of Saul, had finally sent out their champion, a child with a stick. As he reached the valley floor, the scale of the world shifted. The sky seemed larger, the hillside steeper. He was a solitary, upright figure in a vast, horizontal landscape. The two armies were now just distant, shimmering lines of men. Ahead of him, in the center of the valley, stood Goliath, a bronze and iron exclamation point punctuating a declaration of war. He was still a long way off, but his sheer size dominated the vista, and between David and the giant lay the final landmark on his journey, the brook. It was not a mighty river, but a wadi, a seasonal stream that was now a mere trickle of its winter self. It meandered through the center of the valley, a winding ribbon of green in the otherwise dusty, brown terrain. Reeds and tough grasses grew along its banks, and its path was a bed of stones and pebbles, worn smooth and round by the rush of ancient floods. This little stream was the unofficial line of demarcation, the no man's land between the two forces. To cross, it was to commit to the fight. David stopped at the water's edge. The soft gurgle of the brook was a gentle, living sound in the midst of the dead, silent tension. It was the sound of his shepherd's life, the sound of water for the flock, of sustenance, of peace. He took a deep breath, the air smelling of cool water and damp earth. He was not just preparing for battle, he was grounding himself, connecting with the world that he understood, the world that God had made. He leaned his staff against a rock. Then he knelt. He was not praying, not in a formal sense. His whole being was a prayer at that moment. The act of kneeling was one of humility and of purpose. He was a servant, selecting the tools his master had provided. He slung his leather bag around to his front and opened it. Then he reached into the shallow, clear water. The coldness was a shock, a sudden, clarifying sensation. He plunged his hands into the bed of the brook, his fingers searching among the myriad of stones. This was not a random gathering. It was a selection process, an art he had perfected over 1,000 lonely afternoons in the Bethlehem hills. A slinger knew his ammunition as a swordsman knows his blade. He was not looking for jagged edges or flat sides, which would catch the wind and fly untrue. He was searching for a specific kind of stone. His fingers bypassed the rough, the porous, the oddly shaped. He was looking for smoothness, for density, for a weight that felt right in his palm, and for a shape, an egg-like ovoid or a perfect sphere, that was naturally aerodynamic. His hand closed around one. He pulled it from the water, the sunlight glinting on its wet surface. It was a piece of granite, dark and speckled, heavy for its size, almost perfectly round. It had a satisfying heft, a feeling of solidity, of purpose. This was a stone of impact. He placed it carefully into his shepherd's bag. The first one. His fingers continued their search. They found another, a piece of hard, cream-colored limestone, smooth as a bird's egg. It was slightly lighter than the first, a faster stone, perhaps, a stone of velocity. He placed it beside the first. Then came a third, a smooth, dark piece of basalt, volcanic and dense, its surface almost polished by the ceaseless action of the water. A stone of piercing. He chose 2 more with equal care, each one evaluated by touch and weight, an intuitive calculus known only to him. When he was done, 5 smooth stones lay in his bag. 5 chances. 5 instruments of God's will, chosen from the humble bed of a common stream. He had his ammunition. He stood up, his task complete. He took up his staff in one hand, settled the bag with its now heavy contents at his side, and took a step into the water. He crossed the brook, the cool water splashing around his ankles, and stepped onto the other side. He was now on Philistine ground. He had crossed the line. There was no turning back. From the other side of the valley, Goliath watched the boy's strange ritual at the stream with growing impatience and disgust. He had been standing in the morning sun for what felt like an eternity, waiting for Israel's champion. He had expected a chariot, or at least a warrior of some repute, a man like Abner, Saul's general. What he saw was this spectacle: a boy picking up pebbles. The laughter from the Philistine lines grew louder, more derisive. This was the best Israel could offer. This was the army of the God they claimed was all-powerful. The insult was profound. As David began to walk towards him, leaving the brook behind, Goliath's contempt boiled over into a volcanic rage. He gestured for his shield-bearer, who had been standing before him, to step aside. He wanted to see his opponent clearly. He wanted his opponent to see him clearly. He planted his great spear in the ground and put his hands on his hips, a posture of absolute, dismissive arrogance. The distance between them closed. For David, it was like walking towards a mountain that was slowly resolving into the shape of a man. The details became terrifyingly clear. He could see the individual scales on the coat of mail, the intricate engravings on the bronze greaves. He could see the thick, corded muscles in Goliath's arms and neck. He could see the cruel sneer on the giant's lips and the cold, dead light in his eyes. The sheer physical presence of the man was an overwhelming force, an aura of violence and death that rolled off him in waves. Any normal man would have felt his courage evaporate, his legs turn to water. But David was not looking with a soldier's eyes. He was looking with a shepherd's eyes, and he saw not a warrior, but a predator, a beast that needed to be put down. When David was within shouting distance, Goliath could contain his fury no longer. He let out a roar of pure indignation. "Am I a dog?" he bellowed, his voice cracking with rage, "that you come to me with sticks?" He pointed a massive finger at David's shepherd's staff. He felt profoundly dishonored. He was Goliath of Gath, the champion of the Philistines, and they had sent a shepherd boy to herd him like a stray goat. The humiliation was unbearable. He took a menacing step forward, his armor groaning with the movement. "Come here," he snarled, his voice dropping to a low, gruesome promise. "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field." He began to curse David, a vile, flowing torrent of blasphemy. He cursed him by the names of his gods, by Dagon the fish god, and by Ashtoreth, the goddess of war. He was not just threatening David's life. He was damning his soul, promising that his body would be left unburied, a final, terrible dishonor in the ancient world. He was using his voice as a weapon, trying to shatter the boy's nerve before the first blow was ever struck. David did not flinch. He did not slow his pace. He simply stopped, raised his head, and answered. His voice was not a roar like the giant's. It was clear, steady, and it carried across the valley with an authority that had nothing to do with physical power. You come against me with sword, and with spear, and with javelin, David called out, his words a direct and fearless response. He acknowledged the giant's arsenal, the source of his confidence, the tools of the world's power. He was unafraid to name what he was facing. But he declared, and his voice rose with a passion that silenced the jeers on both hillsides. I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. He had drawn the battle line, and it was not in the dust of the valley floor. It was in the heavens. This was not a contest between a giant and a boy. It was a contest between the gods of the Philistines and the one living God of Israel. David was not the hero of this story. He was merely the agent, the humble instrument of a far greater power. He then began to prophesy, his words not a boast, but a divine decree. This day, he proclaimed, the Lord will deliver you into my hand. He pointed his finger at Goliath, the gesture of a judge passing sentence. And I will strike you down, and I will cut off your head, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth. He had not only predicted the giant's doom, but the doom of his entire army, turning Goliath's own threat back on him, magnified 1,000 times over. And all this assembly shall know, his voice rang out, now addressing the watching armies, the entire world, that the Lord does not save with sword and spear. For the battle is the Lord, and he will give you into our hands. It was the most profound theological statement on the nature of warfare ever uttered. It was a declaration of independence from the tyranny of human strength. It was a sermon delivered on a battlefield with a giant for a visual aid. The words hung in the air, a direct challenge that infuriated Goliath beyond all measure. The talking was over. With another roar of pure rage, the Philistine began to advance, pulling his great spear from the ground and holding it at the ready. He moved with a ponderous, earth-shaking tread, a walking mountain of death closing in for the kill. And then David did the last thing anyone expected. He ran, but he did not run away. He ran towards the giant. He ran to meet the advancing threat, his shepherd's tunic flying out behind him, his feet light on the dry, cracked earth. The action was one of shocking, audacious aggression. It was the shepherd running to protect the flock, the predator becoming the prey. As he ran, his right hand darted into his shepherd's bag. His fingers, trained by years of practice, instantly found one of the smooth, heavy stones. He pulled it out. In the same fluid motion, he fitted the stone into the leather pouch at the center of his sling. He had 5 stones, but he moved with the certainty that he would only need one. His left hand held the looped end of the sling, while his right held the release cord. He began to swing it, at first in a slow, easy circle at his side, the stone a heavy weight in the pouch. Then he brought it up, whirling it over his head. The sling began to build speed, the circle tightening, the motion a blur. It began to make a sound, a low, ominous hum that quickly rose in pitch to a sharp, menacing whistle. It was the sound of a hornet, the sound of a deadly projectile being brought to its maximum velocity. To the watching soldiers, it was a tiny, insignificant sound compared to the clang of Goliath's armor. But it was the sound of David's faith being put into lethal motion. Goliath, still advancing, likely raised his great shield slightly, his eyes narrowing, trying to make sense of this boy's strange, whirling attack. He was preparing for a close-quarters fight with a staff, but this was something else entirely. David was a master of his craft. He knew the precise moment, the exact point in the arc of the swing, when he had to release the cord to send the stone flying true. As Goliath took another step, David's right hand opened. The transfer of energy was instantaneous and absolute. The stone, freed from its circular path, shot forward in a perfectly straight line. It left the sling with a sound like a sharp crack of a whip. It was a small, dark blur against the bright sky, moving at a speed that was almost too fast for the eye to follow, well over 100 miles per hour. It flew with the deadly, silent purpose of a striking viper. The distance was perhaps 30 or 40 yards. The stone covered it in less than a second. Goliath may have seen it coming, a flicker of motion at the edge of his vision. He may have tried to duck or turn his head, but he was too big, too slow. The target David had aimed for was the one spot of vulnerability in the fortress of his armor, the open space of his face below the rim of his helmet and above the line of his beard. The stone struck Goliath squarely in the center of his forehead. The sound was not the musical clang of stone on bronze. It was a sickening, wet, percussive crack. It was the sound of a high-velocity projectile shattering a thick plate of bone. The Bible says the stone sank into his forehead. It did not bounce off. It punched through, carrying with it fragments of his own skull deep into his brain. The giant stopped. A look of profound, uncomprehending shock contorted his features. His eyes, which had been burning with rage just a moment before, went vacant. The insults died on his lips. His brain, the center of his pride, his arrogance, and his martial skill, had been destroyed by a pebble. His great spear, the shaft as thick as a weaver's beam, slipped from his nerveless fingers and clattered to the ground. For a long, surreal moment, the immense body simply stood there, swaying slightly, like a great tree that had been severed at its roots. The mighty legs, the pillars that had held up this monument to human strength, began to buckle. And then, with a great, sighing groan of collapsing armor and surrendering flesh, Goliath of Gath fell. He fell forward in the direction of his enemy. he fell face down in the dust, his massive body hitting the floor of the valley with a thunderous, ground-shaking impact that sent up a cloud of dirt. His fall was a final, unintentional act of submission. His face pressed into the soil of the land he had tried to conquer. His forehead bowed before the champion of the god he had so arrogantly defied. The echo of his fall rolled across the valley and then faded. The cloud of dust began to settle. The brook continued to gurgle, oblivious, and on the two hillsides there was a vast, echoing, heart-stopping silence. The Philistine army stood frozen, their mouths agape, their minds unable to process the impossible sight before them. The army of Israel stood equally still, 1,000 men holding their collective breath, daring not to believe what they had just seen. In the center of the valley, the boy was still standing. The giant was not. The battle of the Lord was over. The silence that fell upon the Valley of Elah was a vacuum, a void more profound and deafening than the giant's roar had ever been. For a handful of heartbeats, time itself seemed to stop. Two armies, numbering in the tens of thousands, stood utterly frozen on their respective hillsides, their minds refusing to process the information their eyes were providing. The impossible had happened. The unmovable object had been moved. The unbreakable force had been broken. The mountain had fallen. In the center of the valley, a cloud of dust, the only thing still in motion, gently settled around the colossal, unmoving form of the fallen champion. And standing a short distance away, a solitary, breathing boy. David did not stand and savor the moment. He did not raise his arms in triumph or look to the hillsides for the adulation of the crowd. The task in his mind was not yet complete. The prophecy he had uttered had two parts, and he had only fulfilled the first. With the same focused intensity that had guided his sling, he began to run again, his feet pounding the hard, dry earth as he closed the distance to the body of his vanquished foe. As he drew closer, the sheer scale of Goliath became overwhelming. The giant had been immense from a distance. Up close, he was a geographical feature. His body was a heap of bronze and flesh, a fallen monument. The great shield lay nearby, useless. The spear, with its terrible iron head, lay in the dust a few feet away. David ran past it. He had no need for the giant's weapons. He reached the body and stopped, his chest heaving not from fear, but from the exertion of his run. He looked down at the massive form, at the still, bearded face pressed into the dirt. He saw the wound in the forehead, a dark, ragged hole from which the life force of the great warrior had escaped. The giant's eyes were open, staring with a dull, vacant surprise at the soil of the land he had failed to conquer. David had no sword of his own. He was a shepherd, and shepherds did not typically carry military-grade weapons. But Goliath had one. At the giant's hip, in a scabbard of tooled leather and bronze, was a sword of immense proportions. David knelt beside the body. He wrapped both of his hands around the hilt of the great sword. It was designed for a giant's grip, and his two small hands barely fit around it. With a grunt of effort, he pulled. The blade was long, and the scabbard was pinned beneath the giant's weight. For a moment, it resisted. David repositioned his feet, found his leverage, and pulled again with all his might. The sword came free with a long metallic rasp, a sound that seemed shockingly loud in the continuing, deathly silence of the valley. The weapon was almost too heavy for him to wield effectively. It was a massive, leaf-shaped blade of iron, perfectly crafted for cleaving shields and men in half. It was a tool of butchery, and David now had a butcher's work to do. He planted his feet, raised the great sword high over his head with both hands, the muscles in his young arms straining under the unaccustomed weight. The polished iron caught the morning sun, flashing a brilliant, terrible signal to the watching armies. He brought the blade down with all his strength onto the back of the giant's thick, exposed neck. The blow was brutal and final. He had fulfilled the second part of his prophecy. The battle was well and truly over. He dropped the heavy sword, its work done. He then reached down and took hold of the giant's coarse, braided hair. With another grunt of effort, he lifted the head. It was a ghastly, terrible trophy, the face a mask of dried blood and dust, the eyes still open in that final, vacant stare. He held it high for all to see. That was the image that broke the spell. On the northern ridge, a single Israelite soldier, his throat raw, let out a hoarse, incredulous cry. Another joined him, and another. And then the sound began to swell, a low rumble that grew and grew until it erupted into a single, unified, deafening roar. It was a sound 40 days in the making. It was the sound of 40 days of fear, 40 days of shame, 40 days of humiliation, 40 days of prayer, all transmuting in an instant into a tidal wave of triumphant, violent, ecstatic rage. It was a sound of a nation's spirit, seemingly dead, being resurrected in a single, glorious moment. The roar was not just a cheer, it was a weapon. The army began to move, not in an orderly line, but as a chaotic human avalanche. They poured down the hillside, a torrent of men who had been cowards just moments before, now filled with the courage of lions. They grabbed their spears and shields and charged across the valley, their individual voices joining the collective roar of war. On the southern ridge, the Philistine army witnessed the same horrifying image, the decapitated head of their invincible champion held aloft by a child. For them, the effect was the polar opposite. Their foundation, their entire psychological advantage, had been vaporized. Their demigod was dead. The supernatural aura of fear they had so carefully cultivated was gone, replaced by a sudden, chilling terror of the God who could empower a boy to do such a thing. A collective gasp of horror rippled through their ranks, followed by a moment of panicked indecision. The single combat agreement was forgotten. The discipline of their army shattered. One man, his nerve breaking, threw down his heavy shield and ran. His panic was infectious. Within seconds, the entire Philistine army broke. Their orderly lines dissolved into a stampede of terror. They turned their backs on the valley and fled for their lives. Their flight was the signal the Israelites were waiting for. The Israelite charge did not stop in the center of the valley. It surged forward, a wave of righteous fury crashing into the panicked, retreating mob of Philistines. The battle was over. The slaughter had begun. It is one thing to fight an organized enemy, another thing entirely to cut down men who are fleeing for their lives. The Israelites, their adrenaline pumping, their 40 days of shame, now fueling a burning desire for vengeance, showed no mercy. The chase was long and bloody. It spilled out of the Valley of Elah and into the Philistine-controlled territories of the Shephelah. The Bible says the pursuit went on for miles, the bodies of the Philistines falling on the road to Shaaraim, their blood staining the ground all the way to the gates of their own fortified cities, Gath and Ekron. Men who had woken that morning confident of victory were now cut down from behind as they scrambled in terror towards the safety of their city walls. While the main body of the army was engaged in the pursuit, others turned their attention to the abandoned Philistine camp. It was a city ripe for plunder. They found a scene of a hasty, panicked departure. Tents were left standing, filled with personal belongings. Cooking fires still burned, with meals left uneaten in the pots. And everywhere there were the spoils of war. Finely crafted weapons, bronze armor, chests filled with silver and gold, fine linens, and all the provisions that a professional army carried with it. The men of Israel, who had felt like poor and beaten farmers for more than a month, now swarmed through the enemy camp, liberating the wealth of their oppressors. The plunder was immense, a tangible reward for a victory that still felt like a dream. And what of David? He did not join the pursuit. His work was of a different kind. When the chaos subsided in the valley, he was left with the grim trophies of his victory. He collected the giant's armor, the great bronze helmet, the massive coat of mail, the greaves, the javelin. He then took the giant's head, and carrying these impossibly large and gruesome artifacts, he began his own journey. The Bible tells us he took the head to Jerusalem. At this time, Jerusalem was still largely a Jebusite stronghold, not yet the capital of Israel. Taking the head, there was a powerful prophetic statement, a declaration that this God who had defeated the Philistine champion would one day establish his throne in that city. The giant's armor, the physical proof of his victory, he took and placed in his own tent, a humble shepherd's tent that was now home to the most famous suit of armor in the world. Back on the ridge, King Saul had watched the entire spectacle unfold from the entrance to his tent, his general, Abner, at his side. He had watched the boy walk down the slope. He had watched him face the giant. He had heard the boy's defiant, faithful words echo up the hillside. He had seen the impossible flight of the stone, and he had witnessed the cataclysmic fall. As he watched David run towards the fallen giant, Saul turned to his general, a strange, almost detached question on his lips. "Abner," he asked, "whose son is that youth?" It was a question laden with complexity. Did Saul truly not know? Had he forgotten the young harpist who had soothed his dark moods? Or was his question deeper? Was he asking, what kind of man produces a son like that? From what lineage does such impossible courage spring? Abner, ever the professional soldier, could only give a practical answer. As your soul lives, O king, I cannot tell. When the battle was over and the rout had begun, Abner was dispatched to bring David before the king. David came, still flushed with victory, his youthful face smeared with the dust and grime of the valley. And in his hand, he still carried the dripping, ghastly head of the Philistine. He stood before his king, not as a boy, but as the savior of the nation, yet his posture was one of humble service. Whose son are you, young man? Saul asked him directly, his voice a mixture of awe, relief, and perhaps a nascent, gnawing unease. David's answer was simple, direct, and grounding. It contained no pride, no boasting. He simply stated his identity, the truth that had been his foundation all along. I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. In that moment, standing by the king's side was Saul's own son, the crown prince of Israel, Jonathan. Jonathan was everything a prince should be: brave, noble, handsome, and a proven warrior in his own right. He had watched David's performance in the valley, and he had been captivated. He saw in David not a rival, but a kindred spirit. He saw a courage and a faith that resonated with the deepest parts of his own soul. The Bible describes what happened next with a beautiful, profound simplicity. The soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. It was an instant, powerful bond, a friendship forged in a moment of sublime victory. As Saul spoke with David, Jonathan felt this overwhelming connection. And when the king had finished, Jonathan acted. He made a covenant, a solemn pact of friendship and loyalty with this young shepherd. And to seal it, he began to remove his own royal garments. He took off the robe he was wearing, the robe of a prince, and gave it to David. He then gave him his tunic, his warrior's gear, and then he gave him his own sword, his own bow, and his own belt. It was an act of staggering symbolism. The heir to the throne was stripping himself of his own identity and clothing the shepherd boy in the garments of royalty and military command. It was a prophetic act, a recognition that the future of the kingdom now rested not with the house of Saul, but with the son of Jesse. Saul, for his part, was overjoyed with his new champion. He took David into his service that day, refusing to let him return to his father's house. He made David a commander in his army, and the young man proved to be as wise in leadership as he was brave in battle. He had success in every mission Saul sent him on, and he quickly won the respect and admiration of all the people, from Saul's own servants to the common soldier. The victory in the valley was complete, the nation was saved, and a new hero had been born. For a brief, shining moment, all was well in Israel, but the seeds of tragedy are often sown in the soil of triumph. As the army returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, they made a victory tour through the cities of Israel. As they marched, the women came out from all the towns to meet them. It was a joyous, riotous celebration. They came out with singing and dancing, with tambourines, with lutes, and with joyous shouts. They swarmed around the soldiers, around King Saul in his chariot, and around David, the hero of the hour, who was likely walking, still unused to the pomp of military parades. And as they danced, they sang a song. It was a simple, catchy tune, the kind that spreads like wildfire. The lyrics were meant to praise the nation's heroes, and the refrain, the part that everyone was singing, went like this: Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. To the women, it was just poetry. It was a clever use of escalating numbers to celebrate a great victory. They were praising their king, and they were praising their new champion even more, as was fitting for the man who had single-handedly ended the 40-day crisis. It was a song of pure, innocent joy. But Saul did not hear innocent joy. He heard a statistical comparison. He heard a mathematical equation of his own diminishing glory. The sound of the singing and the dancing, which should have been music to his ears, became a grating, terrible noise. The Bible says Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him. He listened to the happy voices of his people, and the words twisted in his mind, becoming a venomous serpent of paranoia and jealousy. They have ascribed to David tens of thousands, he muttered to himself, his face darkening, the old, familiar torment returning to his eyes. And to me, they have ascribed only thousands. The joy of the great victory vanished, replaced by a cold, bitter calculation of his own honor. The shepherd boy who had saved his kingdom from disgrace had now, with a single song, become the greatest threat to his own fragile ego. He looked at the celebrating crowds, at the adoration they were showering upon David, and he saw not a victory parade, but the beginning of his own political funeral. What more can he have now? Saul whispered to the darkness that was once again gathering in his soul, but the kingdom. And from that day forward, Saul eyed David with suspicion. The great hero who had delivered Israel had become the king's sworn enemy. The victory over the giant in the valley was complete, but it had just given birth to a new and more insidious giant, the monster of jealousy, which would now begin its long and terrible reign in the heart of the king.